I know that Professor Ada Height's class isn't ready to. So, yes, everyone, welcome. Hello, I'm so happy you're all here. And a special welcome to Abraham Edelheid's students who are attending this event from their classroom. My name is Dr. Alkevesius, though my students know me as Professor Sabella. I'm the director of Kingsborough's Holocaust Center. I also teach the Nazi Holocaust at Kingsborough, among a number of other history courses. Today's event is the first of the semester. You can find our event schedule on our website. These events include a private tour of the Museum of Jewish Heritage. And please do get in touch if you'd like to join us. It's free of charge for students, faculty, staff, and all other interested parties. Today's speaker is author and creator Alex Teplish, who is one of the community members on our center's advisory board. Alex Teplish was born in Odessa, Ukraine, formerly known as the USSR. His grandparents, who survived the concentration camps during the Holocaust, and his parents struggled to make ends meet in the USSR and decided to immigrate to the United States when Alex was still young, and the family settled in Brooklyn. Upon graduating from Stony Brook University, Alex worked diligently for over 20 years to become a leading expert in digital and interactive technologies. Outside of his corporate career, Alex has tapped into his creative side to author 2 graphic novels. The first, a science fiction book on the ancient astronaut theories, is titled In the Beginning, the Epic of Anunnaki. His second book, Survivor, Aron's story, part illustrated memoir and part history book, depicts his grandfather's survival during World War II and focuses on an episode of the Holocaust that remains under-researched, which is the deportation of so-called undesirables to concentration camps and farms in Transnistria. Alex has recently adapted the content of his graphic novel into an interactive virtual museum. And today, Alex will talk about his grandfather's experiences during the Holocaust, his graphic novel, and the interactive virtual museum. But before he starts, I wanted to share the following. Alex and I have developed an assignment inspired by his work. And for this assignment, students will delve into the history of the Holocaust and create a unique project that combines survivor testimony, historical context, and visual elements. And drawing inspiration from the book Survivor, Aron's story, and the interactive virtual museum, students will locate a survivor testimony online and craft an illustration, a graphic novel or comic strip, a collage, a compilation of online images. They can do a video or a visual presentation that captures a segment of the survivor's narrative while incorporating 3 significant facts related to the Holocaust. Now, students who complete History 44, so for other people, this is the Holocaust, the history of the Holocaust, with an A grade or better, and who submit this visual project, are then eligible for the Ellen S. Fine Endowed Scholarship Award for Excellence in the Field of Research in Nazi Holocaust Studies. The student who creates the winning project will be awarded $500. If Professor Edelheid's students are interested in this award, please contact me via email. My students are already doing this as a final project anyway. So all of my students who have an A are automatically eligible for the award. But my email address is elke.sabella@kbcc.cuny.edu. And then lastly, I want to mention that today's attendees can buy the graphic novel, Alex's graphic novel, at a discounted price. The link is in the chat. But if you have any kind of problems, I will also send an email to everyone with all the information. Now I'd like to give the floor to today's speaker, Mr. Alex Teplish. Thank you so much for being here. And then after the talk, there will be a Q&A with the audience. You can either ask questions or you can drop them in the chat. All right, the floor is all yours, Alex.
All right, thank you. Hi, I'm Alex Teplish, author and producer of Survivor Aron's Story. Thank you, Professor Vicious and Eidelheit, Kingsborough Community College, and the Kingsborough Holocaust Center for organizing this and having me here today. And thank you to all of you for giving me the opportunity to share my project. I'm going to turn off my camera and I'll be back at the end of the presentation to answer any questions. This project was part of the Cogeco Blueprint Fellowship, generously funded by the UJA Federation of New York and the Genesis Philanthropy Group. I immigrated to the United States with my family in 1978. And as a kid, I grew up listening to the stories of my grandfather, Aron's life and survival during World War II. He had always told me about his experiences living in the Soviet Union as a child, leading up to his struggles through the Holocaust. I'm so grateful to have had him in my life, to have shared so much with me. In 1996, Aron provided an extensive video interview for the Shoah Foundation, founded by Steven Spielberg. This foundation was created to preserve the stories told by still living survivors of the Holocaust. It has over 52,000 of such video interviews in various languages and from many countries. Aron's interview is almost 3 hours long, providing dates and vivid details of his life. As horrible as his stories were, they were also amazing in that a people can go through so much adversity and tragedy in their life, yet remain resilient and be able to move on. Stalin once said, "One death is a tragedy, 1 million deaths is a statistic." While his intentions were likely cynical, it speaks the truth that personal stories affect us most. In addition to reading about history and statistics, it is important to also hear individual narratives and get firsthand account of actual experiences. That is why I felt it important to share Aron's story so that we can visualize the difficulties that he and others were forced to endure and feel empathy with anyone in that situation. My grandfather Aron passed away in April of 2012, and because many other survivors are aging or no longer with us, we must ensure that their stories do not die with them. I believe that it is our duty to pass on their stories to younger generations so that they are not one day erased from the book of history. Survival Aron's Story is a project that has evolved since its inception. When I first started working on this book, I was going to simply write about my grandfather and his experience during the Holocaust, but it didn't feel like that was telling the entire story. I was left with many questions. In addition to visually experiencing Aron's story, I believe it is important to learn about the history leading up to the Holocaust. The first part of this book shares Aron's experience of living in Odessa, Ukraine, part of the former USSR, and his survival as a teenager under the Romanian Nazi occupation during World War II. Aron's story, visually depicted here in the graphic novel form, allows us to experience the events firsthand through the eyes of young Aron himself, while learning about one of the least documented episodes of the Holocaust. The illustrations provide the visuals for the reader and especially approachable for a younger audience. There are many standard books written about people's experiences, but I figured that this format would specifically connect with the next generation of readers. The second part of the book delves deeper into the history of the Jewish diaspora, connecting the historical background to the roots of Jewish persecution, the Soviet Union, World War II, and the Holocaust. Aside from Aron's illustrated story, I will now briefly review the historical components that I identified and researched for this book. I felt that these were the historical puzzle pieces that eventually led to the Holocaust. In the book, I have provided summaries on these topics, details that I felt were relevant. There is a wealth of deeper information on all these subjects that I highly recommend and encourage everyone to explore. We will also watch video clips of Aron giving his testimony to the Shoah Foundation, along with art from the book. The Jewish diaspora answers the question on how Jewish people became spread throughout the world. This goes back to 70 AD, when the Roman Empire gained strength, conquering the Judeans and destroying the Second Temple. By approximately 135 AD, the Jews had experienced a nearly total expulsion from the lands that they called home. This expulsion were the beginnings of the diaspora, a term that refers to the exile of the Jews, who spread throughout other parts of the world. These were the origins of later European Jewish communities, in addition to those that had remained closer by in the Middle East. Jewish life in the Ukraine started with the Pale of Settlement, which was a territory created by Imperial Russia. In 1791, Catherine the Great of Russia first created the Pale. The goal was to remove Jews from Russia and into the Pale, unless they converted to the state religion, Russian Orthodoxy. At its largest, it encompassed 20% of European Russia, which at the time included much of present-day Belarus, Lithuania, Moldova, Poland, Ukraine, and parts of Western Russia. At its peak, the Pale had a Jewish population of over 5 million people. By the 1820s, Yiddish became the primary language of European Jews from Eastern Europe to France. During this time, this constituted 40% of the global Jewish population and the largest concentration of Jews anywhere in the world. Going back a few hundred years, the Black Sea port city of Odessa, just under 400 miles across from Istanbul, Turkey, was a popular destination for the Jews who preferred city life over old world shtetls and rural communities in Ukraine. Having been heavily influenced by French and Italian styles, Odessa's architecture stood out in comparison with that of other Russian cities. Within this topic, I discussed the establishment of Odessa, along with one of the founders, Duc de Richelieu. I also review Jewish settlement in Odessa in the 1700s and 1800s. By World War II, Odessa had a large Jewish population of approximately 180,000, which was one-third of the total population. This is where my family and myself are from, and where the Odessa massacre took place upon invasion during World War II. This will be the first video that we'll watch of my grandfather speaking. Please keep in mind that he does speak Russian in the videos, and I have subtitles, so that's very important to pay attention to.
Я, Арон Рабинович, родился в 1928 году, 7 ноября, в городе Одессе. Родился я в рабочей семье. У нас было 4 детей. Папа работал, мама работала. Воспитались в семье, в обычных семьях, воспитывая детей. Ходил в школу. Гулял, играл на улице, все мои дела. Мы жили очень скромно, бедно, можно сказать, потому что ту зарплату, которую папа получал, нам не хватало на жизнь. Мама приходилось подрабатывать. Так жили. Голодать мы не голодали, но в роскоши мы не были. Мама у нас была, как мама, все мамы, хорошие мамы. Замечательная хозяйка, чистеха такая, понимаете, соблюдала чистоту. И ей было нелегко, у нас было 4 детей. Вместе с тем она справлялась со всеми своими обязанностями мамы и жены, как говорится. Я был самый младший, да. Я помню, что мама меня очень любила. Обычно самого маленького больше любит. Как раз в семье у нас была такая атмосфера, дружная атмосфера. И отмечали мы в основном только советские праздники. Но вместе с тем ходили чисто так на все праздники, на 1 мая. Обычно мать покупала там что-то такое свежее, красивое, чтобы выглядели как все советские дети. Мы ходили, смотрели, ходили, на парад ходили, вот такое вот. Как все дети. У нас и были разные, русские, украинцы, и мы не придавали этому значения. Мы не знали, что такое русский, что такое украинец. Нам было безразлично, мы даже не понимали, что какая разница между русским и украинцем. Жили дружно.
Pogroms is another important topic to know about when learning about the Holocaust. These events were precursors to the Holocaust and go back far into history. making abuse of the Jews commonplace amongst the masses. Pogroms stem from the Russian verb bramit, which means to destroy or demolish violently. In particular, it mostly referred to the widespread anti-Semitic riots in the Russian Empire, with a large concentration occurring in the Pale of Settlement. The struggle against the random attacks led many to adopt the ideas of the communists and eventually participate in the Bolshevik Revolution, as these ideals espoused equality for all people. In this section of the book, I describe Kristallnacht, also known as Night of Broken Glass. The name refers to the wave of violent anti-Jewish pogroms which took place in 1938 throughout Germany and its other occupied territories. What started off as a massive pogrom, like so many other throughout history, led to one of the most historically tragic crimes against Jews and humanity. A seizure of power from the Tsar had taken place during the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917. Following the Russian Civil War, the Soviet Union was formed in 1922. Although there were many Jews involved in this movement, they were still a small percentage of the overall members. That didn't stop outsiders from calling the Bolshevik Revolution a Jewish-led conspiracy. Between 1936 and 1940, during the Great Purge, Joseph Stalin had eliminated Jews from senior party, government, diplomatic, security, and military positions. When Joseph Stalin had assumed power in the Soviet Union in the mid-1920s, he began to rule with an iron fist. Within this topic in the book, we review the Gulag system of hard labor re-education camps, as well as Holodomor, which was a man-made famine in the Ukraine in 1932 and 1933. Although most people were not aware of it at the time, it was caused by Stalin's forced collectivization of agriculture. Within the Ukrainian SSR, an estimated 2.5 to 7.5 million citizens, mostly ethnic Ukrainians, died of starvation in this peacetime disaster. Stalin's reputation for brutality eventually contributed to the Nazi Party's justification for invasion. The Nazis successfully recruited locals, such as Ukrainians, to support their side with anti-Stalin and anti-communist propaganda. In this video, we'll hear Aron talk about his memories of living under the Stalin regime.
В 1933 году был голод в России, по всей России. Тогда, когда началась сталинская депрессия, так тоже в основном все люди, может быть, старшего возраста люди, мы об этом не особое значение не придавали мы этому. Мы не могли различить, кто прав и кто виноват. Или вообще это сталинская депрессия, или это что-то происходит другое в стране. Потому что мы были дети, и мы не придавали этому значения. Но все считали, что он делает правильно. Может быть, думали другое, но сказать все боялись, потому что... Конечно, кто даже шепотом скажет, так тот уже больше говорить не будет после этого. Ну и тогда была другая политика. Им нужна была советской власти рабсила. Бесплатная рабсила. И были даны такие указания, это я уже узнал после войны от многих людей, которые были даны такие негласные указания, чтобы давать как можно больше заключенных. Каждое производство находило кого-то в чем-то, он что-то сказал, или порвал портрет, или там, знаете, вот такое какое-то малейшее недовольство проявил, и тут же этот человек был забран и послан на принудительные работы в лагеря, в том числе и папа. Вы знаете, мы песни все пели про Сталина, и нам столько говорили об этом, и вообще мы думали, что без Сталина вообще жить не можем. Взрослые так все боялись, все тряслись. Времена были такие. Сталин это был на первом плане, понимаете. Даже сочиняли песни на еврейском языке, и тоже про Сталина. Ну вот, была такая песня на еврейском. «Ломер тренкен аллах хаем фардем либм хавр Сталин». Давайте выпьем мы все вместе за нашего любимого вождя Сталина. Я знаю, у кого патефон в квартире был, так это была первая пластинка.
Aside from understanding the Soviet Union, it is also important to explain the ideology of the Nazis, with eugenics at its basic. The concept of eugenics was that a master race had evolved and should be bred to be superior to the other inferior races of the world. The modern interpretation of eugenics was based on an idea of hierarchy of races, judged by the darkness of skin color and human skull dimensions. The Nazis included the practice of eugenics as part of their mainstream society, calling it racial hygiene. Sterilization and euthanasia programs were also used to eliminate those deemed unworthy of life or reproduction. By the 1930s, both educational and storybooks for children in Germany taught their readers about the Aryans, the master race, further conditioning the youth to accept the horrors that were in practice and those that were yet to come. Biased, misleading, and often deceptive information used to promote a particular political cause or point of view, influencing specific populations, has been used by many governments throughout history. The Soviet regime under Stalin, and especially Nazi Germany under Hitler, are famous for their use of this powerful tool. The methods of delivery of propaganda have been literary works, state-run newspapers, flyers, leaflets, negative caricatures, radio, and later movies and television. Anti-Semitic propaganda dates back a bit further into history, with one of the most famous works being the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. This was an anti-Semitic hoax describing a Jewish plan for global domination, first published in Russia in 1903. It was translated into multiple languages and disseminated internationally, including in the United States, in the earlier part of the 20th century. Despite it being proven a fake and hoax, people continue to propagate this theory around the world to this day. Various types of anti-Semitic and other propaganda were used to cultivate young people's minds to believe that they were the super race and all others were to be dominated. In Nazi Germany, children were targeted at a young age. Required readings of anti-Semitic propaganda, including books with titles such as The Poisonous Mushroom. Other examples of anti-Semitic propaganda include 1940 Nazi pseudo-documentary, The Eternal Jew, that depicted Jews as genetically destined to be wandering cultural parasites. Another example of targeting the young in Germany was a board game called Get the Jew Out, in which the object of the game was to use game pieces with Jewish stereotypes out of the country. During World War II, invading a country, the Nazis distributed anti-Semitic propaganda in the form of leaflets of various languages containing negative caricatures, stereotypes, and claims that the Jews were spreading disease and were out to take advantage of the people of these countries. A common element of racial propaganda, not only limited to the Nazis, is depicting its target as insects, vermin, or less than fully evolved humans. We also have to pay attention to modern-day propaganda, which now comes in the form of memes, fake news, videos, and things like that on social media. World War I, also known as the Great War, was supposed to be the war that ended all wars. Afterwards, many Germans felt unfairly punished. This, along with the economic depression, eventually gave rise to the influence of the Nazi Party. Taking advantage of the dire situation in his first political speech, Hitler promised the citizens a better life. Initially, in the 1924 elections, the Nazis had obtained only 3% of the popular vote, but gradually gained strength. By using propaganda, spending a great deal of money on newspapers, leaflets, and poster campaigns, the Nazi Party began to increase its appeal. Unfortunately, instead of World War I being a war that ended all wars, it actually directly influenced World War II. Hitler wanted to dominate all of Europe, starting with Poland. With Nazi Germany now gaining strength and new territories, it had set its sights on conquering the Soviet Union, despite the German-Russian non-aggression pact signed in August of 1939. Their newest plan, codenamed Operation Barbarossa, was the invasion of the Soviet Union. Hitler's own manifesto, Mein Kampf, had clearly stated that his goal was to invade and conquer the Soviet Union, and that he considered Bolshevism to be the tool of the Jewish people to control the Russian population. In addition to his hatred for the Jews, he also considered the majority of Russian and other Slavic peoples to be subhuman. His intended goal was to kill, deport, or enslave them, clearing the lands for living space to be repopulated by the Germanic race. At the time, General Antonescu of Romania thought Germany to be a strategic partner, hoping that his alliance would eventually win back the territories taken over by the Soviets. From 1940 to 1944, Romania had become an ally of Nazi Germany and shared its anti-Semitic agenda. In this section of the book, I explain the details that led to the two world wars, their alliance, and the outcomes. I also explore the rise of Hitler and the Nazi Party. And now we'll watch a short video of Aron describing the start of the war.
Утром мы еще гуляли, бегали по улице, по полянке, там, где мы занимались. Это было, мы уже были тогда в летнем отпуске, каникулы летние. И объявили по радио Левитан. Радио у нас в доме не было радио, поскольку мы, как говорится, не имели средств, пока не дошли до того. Но в нашем доме было очень много радиоприемников у людей, и на улицах были эти самые радиоприемники, такие говорители. Объявляли по всем радио, по всем точкам.
Внимание! Говорит Москва. Граждане и гражданки Советского Союза. Сегодня в 4 часа утра, без всякого объявления войны, германские вооруженные силы атаковали границы Советского Союза. Началась Великая Отечественная война советского народа против немецко-фашистских захватчиков.
Целый день повторялось. Собирались люди, толпы людей, отдельные группы людей, и каждый высказывал свое мнение по-разному. Говорили, что война — это пагубное дело, и хорошо нам не будет от войны. Так она и была. В первую очередь война коснулась евреев. Папа вынес решение, что эвакуироваться мы не будем. Когда румыны начали приближаться, и немцы к Одессе, и окружили Одессу, и все начали эвакуироваться, большинство людей. Так папа сказал, что он не хочет. И я еще с одним мальчиком моего возраста, мы пошли в порт посмотреть, там что. Кто-то нам что-то сказал, что там сабли, пистолеты вот такое валяется. И действительно, когда мы пришли, я помню, как лежали эти пулеметы, и гранаты, и кучи прямо, и винтовки, и танки стояли. Уже не было никого. Кружил немецкий самолет двухкрыльный, который его никто не трогал, все время над городом. Все, мы уже знали, что скоро начнутся наши муки. И вот я пошел, посмотрел, даже еще взял лошадей оттуда, упряженных, которые, если бы я их не вывел, так они бы сгорели бы там, потому что все это то, что немцы, русские оставили в Красной армии, в основном все они поджигали. Чтобы преступление это не попало в руки врагу, так они и уничтожали, даже и лошадей. Кто-то что-то сказал, что румыны идут. Я пошел посмотреть просто, как мальчик, мне было интересно. Ну, я увидел, что идет локотенент по званию капитан румынский, шел спереди. Шли уверенно, так, четким шагом, как победители. И один жилец с нашей улицы, так он вынес полотенце с петухами, буханка хлеба и соль. Говорит, дорогие наши, говорит, Мы вас ждали 23 года. А потом появились, через день-два появились немцы. Они ходили по городу. Они считали себя на 10 голов выше румынов. Понимаете?
While the rest of the world called it World War II, the Soviets had their own additional name, the Great Patriotic War. In July of 1942, one of the deadliest battles ensued between the Nazis and the Soviets, called the Battle of Stalingrad, lasting almost 7 months. Most historians consider it the greatest battle of the war between these nations and was the turning point for the Nazis' Eastern Front. The Soviets had encircled and defeated an entire German army, preventing the Nazis from making the strategic move deeper into Soviet territory. Although it was successful in changing the course of the war, it was also the bloodiest battle, with almost 2 million Russian military and civilian casualties. By 1945, once the German forces were completely out of Soviet territory, the Soviet armies were able to pursue them across Eastern Europe and into Germany itself. World War II remains to this day the deadliest war in all of history. In this brief video, we can see how many battles took place on their Eastern Front between the German and Soviet armies. We can also see how deadly they were as the Soviets pushed the Germans back to their own territory. As you watch the timeline, keep in mind that the larger the circle, the deadlier that particular battle. The Romanian army posted signs for all Jews to report to designated areas or risk being put to death, including non-Jews that protected them. Each apartment building had a group of people who allied themselves with the occupiers and immediately began identifying who they knew as Jews. They were also a minority of non-Jews that risked their lives to help in any way they could. And so the Romanian army began to assemble many Jews in the first days. Everyone in the Soviet Union was required to provide their internal passport, which stated their nationality, which included Russian, Ukrainian, Greek, Jew, and others. They killed approximately 30,000 people in the first few days, known as the Odessa massacre. The term Holocaust, from the Greek words holos and kasta, means whole and burned, was originally used as a term for burned offerings. By the 1800s, it became an English term referring to the massacre or destruction of a large number of people. Only in the 1960s did people begin using this word to refer to the government-sponsored genocide and murder of 6 million Jews in World War II by Nazi Germany and their collaborators. In Hebrew, the Holocaust is also known as the Shoah, which means catastrophe. Although most people tend to think of the Jewish tragedy when hearing this word, approximately 5 million non-Jews also fell victim to the Holocaust. The Holocaust became a process of overlapping stages, consisting of emigration, ghettoization, firing squads, and concentration camps, and ultimately death camps. While most people think that it was only the Germans who carried out the terror of the Holocaust, Romania was also responsible for exterminating hundreds of thousands of Jews. Another lesser-known fact is that a multitude of people who had been Soviet citizens also collaborated with the Nazis and Romanians, bringing additional abuse, terror, and murder to the Jews. In fact, the horrors that my grandparents experienced during the Holocaust were mostly perpetrated by the Romanian army as well as local collaborators. Some of their experiences, including being crammed and standing in cattle cars for almost a full day, death marches for miles through the freezing cold and snow, and being locked up in large groups in old barns without heat or food. In this section of the book, I explore the various facets of the Holocaust and delve deeper into the subject. And now we'll watch a short video of Aron talking about his specific Holocaust experience.
Шли, мама нас собрала всех, сделала такие торбы походные, значит, на веревке у каждого было. И у меня, и у брата, я все. И кое-что спекла, там картошку сварила. Мы пошли поменяли. Брат мой пошел на базар, поменял вещи на картошку, там на муку такую вот. И вышли мы. Нас ожидали товарные вагоны. На окнах решетки. Вокруг жандармы стоят. И начали давать команду. Значит, наталкивать вагоны. Что даже наталкивать, что мы стояли, сесть никто не мог. Такой был страшный мороз, что квартала пройти невозможно было. А мы должны были идти, дети, и старики, и больные, идти по степи в такой мороз, ветер, 25 километров. Не каждый мог вытерпеть. Все, кто отставал, опять же расстреливали, убивали. Все. Они отрезали заднюю часть нашей колонны, ограбили и расстреляли. Там была папина двоюродная сестра, которую мы больше никогда не видели. Она была с нами в одном этапе, но она пожилая женщина и грузлая такая была. И шла в задней части колонны, значит, она попала жертвой, так как и многие другие сотни людей. Люди падали и так и оставались лежать. А кто мог еще ходить, тот продвигался. Ну, при входе в Доманевку так нас встретил начальник полиции Доманевского района. Доманевки-то. Бандит такой. Он нас встретил, остановил колонну. Он, очевидно, уже имел сигнал о том, что евреи, которые будут пригнаны, это уже на работу, а не на расстрел. Это, как я уже говорил, что мы первый наш этап, который из нас начали не расстреливать. И остановил, значит, был так добротно одетый. И вынимает пистолет, ну, он всегда был пьяный. Жиды, я ваш Бог, работать будете? Ну, все, да, господин, да, пока вот кто не будет работать, говорит, расстреляю, как собаку, пока он. Заскочили хулиганы. Они решили жидов ограбить. То есть забрать последнее то, что у нас было. И избивали, заскочили, начали бить этими железными прутьями и забрали, буквально оставили нас голыми. В полном смысле голыми. Наступили холода, мы голые босые, мы же не могли там быть. Нас опять вернули в баню. И в бане уже на работу нас тоже не могли погнать, потому что мы совершенно были раздеты. Нам завезли горбу, это горбу соломы, как для свиней. И каждый имел свой участок, опять же, занял там, где он был. Раньше лежал до того, что нас выгнали оттуда. И закрыли на замок. И еду почти не давали. Мы не работали, не кормили. Мы были все настолько несчастные, грязные, вшивые. Ну, и именно в тот период, в ту зиму, в эту холодную и голодную зиму, умерли все пожилые люди. Всеми болели. У каждого из нас была чесотка, экзема. Тиф мы перенесли. Ослабленные. Понимаете? Ну, мы молодые ели, а родители не могли этого кушать. Папа в особенности. И десятки других людей. Я всех помню по именам. И сейчас представляю их внешний вид. Вот ту зиму умерли и мои родители от голода. Так там была большая воронка. Так первый, который умер, так полицай сразу говорит, это будет ваша братская могила. Вот туда бросали, там наши родители, там все. Папа, умирая, просил кушать. Он просил, он не понимал того, что мы под замком. Умирая, он просил кушать, печенку еще просил. Такое вот. Хочу сильно печенку. Это я помню. Мама сильно больная. Маму уже на работу не гоняли, она уже не могла ходить. Она уже так истощала, что это был скелет, просто скелет. Она уже есть не могла, и она умерла. Умерла от голода. Она говорила, что мы были дружны.
While images of the Holocaust tend to depict the Jews as submissive or pure victims, there are numerous instances of those who fought back. During World War II, 500,000 Jewish men and women served in the Soviet Army, 550,000 in the United States Armed Forces, 100,000 in the Polish military, 30,000 in the British Army, and hundreds of thousands more in other Allied forces. I had the opportunity to attend the 70th anniversary of Victory Day, in which many Jewish veterans of the former Soviet Union came out to celebrate. Most of these brave men and women are now in their 80s and 90s, possibly in their hundreds as well. Aside from over 1 million Jews who fought for the military, there were also a large Jewish partisan movement in the Soviet Union. A unique hiding place of the Soviet partisans were the Odessa catacombs. The total distance of this underground labyrinth is longer than that from Odessa to Paris, making it the largest catacomb system in the world. In addition to the more organized partisan movements, there were a multitude of uprisings by Jews at the concentration camps and ghettos. In this video, we'll hear Aron describe the liberation, when they were liberated from the camp and finally saw some freedom.
Мы знали, что вот город такой-то взяли, вот, Сталинградская битва, все это. Кое-что до нас доходило, понимаете? То были румыны хозяева, а то их вообще не стало, они уехали в Румынию. Их отозвали и оставили нашу территорию вместе с нами, со всеми, за месяцев 5 до того, что освободили нас. То есть мы перешли к немцам. Сегодня одна дивизия была у нас в форме после боев. Их там переодевали и кормили. Они уехали, скот без конца гнали. И танки шли, орудия. Они только уничтожали, чтобы не осталось там больницы, там маслобойки, вот это, железные дороги. Вот все это, солома, сено, все это. Скот расстреливали. Они даже и не думали о том, что могли остаться живым евреи там. Конечно бы нас бы уничтожили даже. Они даже не представляли, что может остаться еврей. Они понятия не имели. Так мы увидели, что движется колонна. Не колонна, а люди. Мы увидели, что не немцы. Так там была одна женщина, среди них лейтенант. И она нас увидела. Мы единственные, которые мы с ней встретились при входе в это село. Она говорит, ребята, немцы есть в селе? А мы же видели, когда мы уезжали, колонна выезжала. Она говорит, вы можете показать? Конечно. И мы пошли показывать, куда пошли, в какое направление, по какой дороге пошла эта колонна. Как мы только начали спускаться вниз, эти автоматчики их увидели, они кубарем скатились. Те скатились буквально вот таким образом, нам кричат, ложись. Мы легли и начали стрелять по этой колонне. А те, кого убили, кого ранили, лошадей, знаете, вот такая паника началась там. Нам это все видно. Те разбежались, то и были не убитые, не раненые, как говорится. И их они не видели, но видели-то они нас вдвоем. Мы лежали и начали стрелять, и пули прямо вот Чудо нас освободили 28 марта, а Одессу освободили 10 апреля. Это еще взяло время. Так мне пришлось дать показания, привели всех наших, и нас мобилизовали ребят, которым было 16 лет и до 16 пару месяцев. Нас вызвали в военкомат. Не только еврейское, евреев там вообще мало было. Я был и еще был, моих два товарища там были. А всех местных жителей, украинцев, мобилизовали в армию. Вызвали нас в военкомат, и нам сказали, что вы должны, скоро вас возьмут в армию, через год, но этот год, пока недохват милиционеров, там и то такое, вы должны помогать милиции. Стоял, охранял с винтовкой, которая была выше меня в 2 раза. Стоял, охранял своих полицаев. Я их выводил, и они меня видели, я их видел. И я давал показания, какие зверства они чиняли против нас.
A question I myself have asked throughout my life has been, why the Jews? The ones who have pointed their fingers of hatred at the Jews have used various lines of reasoning. In this topic of the book, I review various concepts, such as the claim of being the chosen people, deicide, which is the blame placed on Jewish people for the death of Jesus, cultural differences and assimilation, Jews as a separate race, economic factors, as well as Jews as scapegoats for a population's troubles. In my opinion, the real reason, one of moral ideologies, is what separated Hitler and the Nazi belief from the Jews. Finally, there is also the subject of crimes against humanity, which discusses the outcomes of World War II, how it affected world policy, global organizations that were formed, as well as other genocides that have occurred since the war. From the years following the Holocaust to present day, there have been numerous documented large-scale crimes against humanity. Anywhere from tens of thousands to millions of people have been persecuted and killed in systematic ways, similar to the crimes against Jews during the Holocaust. Persecution has varied from country to country based on race, religious or spiritual affiliations, political affiliation, and ethnicity, but all these instances have had many similar components. By recognizing these components, supporting international cooperation to prevent them, and keeping an open dialogue amongst nations, as well as neighbors, it is possible to one day make such crimes a thing of the past. Some of the goals of this project are to educate and also promote unity and empathy, especially to the younger generation. One way to do this is to explore our common histories and help one another in our pursuits of happy and equal life. Let this one example serve as a guide. Rabbi Leon Jick, who was deeply involved in civil rights activism alongside Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., was arrested in 1964 with several other rabbis for their protest during this movement. In a group letter from their jail cell, they referenced the atrocities during the Holocaust as one of their inspirations. The words "never again" must be applied to the whole world, and we must all be the stewards of this mission. It is time that the future of humanity be placed into the hands of peaceful citizens of all nations. Now I'd like to share some older photos of the survivors in my family, honoring each of them. They have all been included in this book and were still children and teenagers at the time of the war. Isa Golder, brother of my grandmother Genya, who survived the concentration camps and forced labor. He was one of the first immigrants to come to New York in the mid-70s from the former Soviet Union. He is no longer with us, but has 3 grandchildren and 4 great-grandchildren growing up in the United States. Salya Golder, the eldest brother in the Golder family. After barely escaping alive from a Nazi firing squad, he went in search of my grandma in the death camps. There he found her, unable to walk, and carried her on his back for over 150 kilometers back to Odessa. He is no longer with us, leaving behind 4 grandchildren and 4 great-grandchildren. Genya Rabinovich, maiden name Golder, my grandmother. She was the only surviving daughter of Tsilya and Benjamin, having experienced 2 of her younger sisters, one a little girl and the other a newborn baby, perish from starvation in the camps. We immigrated to the United States together, and she is thankfully still a big part of my family's life. She has 4 grandchildren and 7 great-grandchildren. Zina Rabinovich, the eldest sister of Aron. survived the concentration and labor camps, and helped get Aron and their brother Yosa to a Jewish orphanage in the final year of the war. She eventually immigrated to Germany and passed away at the age of 90, having a granddaughter and 3 great-grandchildren. Misha Rabinovich, eldest brother of Aron, surviving the camps and finally being taken to work on a bridge for the Nazis. At a completion of this work, him and Saleh were lined up in front of a firing squad and shot at. They both fell on top of the dying others and lied there, pretending to be dead as well. They stayed still until the Germans left, finally climbing out of this death pit. Misha was injured by a bullet, but survived. He passed away many years ago, leaving behind 2 sons. Yossi Rabinovich, who spent most of his time and experiences alongside my grandfather Aron, also has an interview with the Shoah Foundation. He passed away, leaving behind 2 grandchildren and 5 great-grandchildren. Aron Rabinovich, my grandfather and main character of this book. Along with his sister and brothers, they lost their parents to starvation in the camps. Although he didn't achieve a high-ranked career, he was an inspiration to me. He loved history, world politics, and storytelling, and we had a very close relationship throughout his life. And last but not least, my great-grandmother, Celia Golder. After the war, she reunited with her 3 children and also took in Aron and his siblings until they were able to be on their own. She became the matriarch of our families, and without her, none of us would be where we are today. She also immigrated to the United States with us in 1978 and helped care for me until the age of 6, which memories I still treasure. She would now have 6 grandchildren, 11 great-grandchildren, and 16 great-great-grandchildren. Aron completed his interview with the following wishes for us all.
Что я могу им сказать? Чтобы они не знали только этого горя, которое пережили мы. Это главное.
My goal is to spread Holocaust education, empathy, and unity, especially beyond the Jewish community. Despite the efforts in place, anti-Semitism continues to persist along with other forms of pure hate. I think it is important for the younger generation to learn from history to prevent anything like this from happening again. Before concluding my presentation, I'd also like to share the most recent additions to this project, an interactive virtual museum open 24/7 and free to the public. The virtual museum is accessible via browser or smartphone, containing an immersive environment with 10 exhibit rooms, digital artifacts and descriptions, videos, audio tours, and a 360-degree view of one of the barracks at Auschwitz. I hope you all can explore and share this experience. Again, I'd like to thank you all for coming today. This concludes my presentation, and I'd be happy to answer anyone's questions at this point.
Hi, I wanted to know, like, where would you find this link to the virtual museum?
So if you go to the main website, survivoraronstory.com, which I will share all the links right now in the chat for anybody to access. The museum is linked right from the top of the website.
Okay, thank you.
And I've also provided a direct link to the museum as well in the
Alex, thank you so much. This wonderful presentation. I've heard about it before, and it just got me all emotional again. I just wanted to start this Q&A with a couple of questions, and then I'd like to open the floor for other questions. The first question I thought of, which is important for the students who are going to do the project that we have come up with, the assignment. Can you explain the creative process? For example, the teamwork, the choice of color palette, the style, and the book's format. Who or what inspired you?
Yeah. So because I already worked on another graphic novel before this, and I had a love for that format of books, I've always felt like graphic novels and comic books are like movies in a book. You could read and you could watch the visuals. So that was always my inspiration to adapt my grandfather's story into this format. The first step was really translating his interview from Russian into English and putting it into a chronological order. I also verified a lot of the information he specified, the dates, the locations, with actual historical information. I worked with a historian to verify that everything I had was factual and historically accurate. And one of the interesting backstories of the project is that while the Romanian army were allied with the Nazis at the time of my grandfather's experience, I worked with a modern day team of Romanians, or Romanian artists, to illustrate the book. They actually learned a big part of this history by working on this project, something they didn't necessarily learn in their school system. The process after translating and putting the story together in chronological order was finding images and artifacts online that I can share with my artists, because I wanted to make sure that everything was historically accurate and realistic. I would send my artists descriptions, photos of each panel in the book, and they would depict it in an illustration format. We also worked with a separate team of colorists on that in that studio that we worked, we communicated and developed this color palette. We wanted the images to look like old historical restored photos. So we used that kind of color palette to give it that feel. Yeah, so.
That's great. Thank you so much. And then I had another question. There are very few Holocaust survivors left, and people are increasingly looking to technology to, keep their memories alive, but also to engage younger audiences, as you also mentioned. So, for example, many Holocaust museums and research centers have nowadays purchased holograms of survivor stories. I was wondering, how important are these efforts in your opinion? And do you fear that we will indeed forget about the Holocaust and its victims without first-person accounts?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this technology is very important. It's brand new. It hasn't been done before. It wasn't available in the past. So there are other historical events prior to the Holocaust that could have been kept more significant. By recording the survivors, first of all, by the Shoah Foundation, having over 50,000, 52,000 interviews, that's already something to preserve actual people's stories directly from the source. These holograms take it a step further because people can actually go to these museums and interact with them as if it's a real person sitting there and telling you their story. So it's something very new, cutting edge technology, and very impactful. I think that eventually the Holocaust could become similar to the Civil War, slavery, and other historical situations that the younger generations just see as part of history and not necessarily feel a connection to. So these technologies definitely help reinforce these stories and bring a closer connection to survivors by modern day people.
And then do you think that, within contemporary Holocaust education, do you think that there might be too much emphasis on individual experiences and maybe not enough on the general history of the Holocaust? And if you agree with that, how did you try to address this in your work?
Yeah, so I mentioned in the presentation that I feel it's very important to actually look at or listen to actual survivor stories, actual accounts and testimonies. Those are the stories that we actually feel a connection to, versus just studying pure facts. For example, 6 million Jews were killed, 11 million people were killed by the Holocaust, 20 million plus were killed during the war. I mean, these are all interesting statistics, but it doesn't really create this emotional connection. So number one, by learning directly from survivors, but also second and third generation people, descendants of survivors, continuing to tell their stories is very important. I do think that Holocaust education is not just about the Jewish people. It's not just a concern of the Jewish people. It's really a lesson for the world to learn from this time of history. It's a pivotal point of history. And had we had even more education throughout the world, I know Germany has a curriculum throughout all of their grades from very, very young age. Had we had this kind of curriculum across the world, we may have prevented other atrocities that have happened since. We may have prevented the current Russia-Ukraine war. I mean, there are a lot of things that, and tragic situations that have happened, probably because there's not enough of this type of Holocaust and empathy education.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Does anyone else have a question? Just feel free to either pop it in the chat, or you can also just unmute yourself and ask any question.
Well, I don't have a question, but can you hear me, Elka?
Yes, yes, we can.
Yeah, I just want to thank Alex. This was a really great presentation and very touching, very moving. You know, ever since even I was a student, I took a course in survivorship where we had live survivors from the Holocaust come in and talk and whatnot at Lehman College, part of CUNY. And I agree that hearing individual testimony is just really one of the most important things that moves the soul and turns the mind in favor of the importance of this sort of thing. So thank you for a great presentation and for your work.
Thank you so much, Rick. And just that you know, Alex, Rick is one of my colleagues, and I'm so happy that he took the time to come to this presentation. And Rick, by the way, is like, so, and I know that this is something that you would find interesting because you are thinking a lot about the mind. So Alex and I had a conversation yesterday as well about, you know, the kind of like the psychological, you know, it's not just for other people, it's also to cope with trauma for the people who are doing the interviews. The interviewees also get a lot back from the interview process and from now making these holograms and participating. So it helps them process and it helps to educate other people. So it's very important for all the parties involved. Are there any other questions?
I have a comment.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed listening to Alex, and I personally I love Holocaust topic a lot. I learned about it a lot, so it's like one of my favorites. One of the topics in history that I love learning about, and the way like when you talked about survivors, like it gave me goosebumps because it's scary, like, oh, like we can't even think like, oh, at that time like everyone was so devastated with people, like how they were treating them. You could imagine if someone was a survivor. So it's like at the end of the day, or at the end of the result, when we're living in this world, it's like, yeah, there are people who survive certain situations, and you know, and we need to learn from them that there were survivors. So God forbid if anything happens to us in this era, you know, like for example COVID, you know, like everyone was struggling. So like it's something to learn about. Like history is something you should learn from in the current times. So I take history like that. But yeah, I really enjoyed, so thank you very much again.
Thank you for the comment. And yeah, I agree that history is not just something we learn for academic purposes and for school and to continue with our careers, but it's really something for all of us to learn from and help develop the world into a more positive direction.
Absolutely. Also, I just wanted to remind everyone that, you know, what I was saying in the introduction, Alex's graphic novel you can now buy for a discounted price, and it is really, I have it right here. It is a stunning book, and I really, you know, I normally don't like promote people's work like this, but this is really something else. And I think that it's money well spent. So I would definitely advise you or encourage you to buy the book. You can just click on the link and get yourself a copy. If no one else has any questions or comments, I think we can end it here. I just want to thank you so much for coming. This was a really nice amount, like a nice number of attendees, especially considering that we had a full classroom as well. So I'm very happy that this was so successful. And I just want to thank Alex one more time, not only for this beautiful presentation and the work that you are doing to raise awareness, but also your presence on our advisory board. We're all the more richer for it. So thank you so much. And I wish everyone else a very good afternoon. And I hope to see you again during any of our future events. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.